Sergeant Eliza Thorne sat in the worn leather of seat 22B, watching the scrubland of West Texas blur beneath the wing. It was a routine domestic flight, the kind that smelled faintly of stale pretzels and cheap jet fuel. For Eliza, though, this wasn't just a flight. It was a cage. Every tremor of the engine, every slight dip and rise felt like a deliberate insult. Just 6 months ago, she hadn't been watching the world from a tiny, cramped window. She had been in it, piloting an Army Black Hawk, the sun blinding bright through her own canopy, the rotor wash a fierce, beautiful song. Eliza wasn't just any pilot. She was one of the best rotary wing aces the Army had trained. But you wouldn't know it now. Looking at the faded jeans and simple fleece jacket she wore, she was what they called grounded, or, in the cruel, whispered shorthand of the base where she used to serve, the paper pilot. The shame of that name was a dull, constant ache behind her ribs. It wasn't incompetence that had clipped her wings. It was a choice made in a split second, high above the dust of a foreign war zone. The weight of the past, a quick, painful memory, flashed, the radio crackling with panic. A sudden flash flood had trapped a handful of humanitarian workers, civilians, non-combatants, in a ravine just minutes before a massive scheduled bombing run. Her orders were crystal clear. Proceed to the primary military objective, ignore secondary civilian chatter. The mission was paramount. But Eliza had looked at the coordinates, looked at the faces of her crew, and made a different calculation. She diverted. She landed in a blinding sandstorm, snatched the workers, and got out barely 10 minutes before the airstrike leveled the area. She saved 7 innocent people. She also missed her rendezvous, delayed the primary mission by an hour, and violated a direct, written command: no deviation for unscheduled civilian rescue. The brass had praised her courage, but condemned her judgment. General Sterling, a man whose word was iron, signed the order. Eliza Thorne was officially charged with insubordination and removed from flight status. She was relegated to a desk job, shuffling papers and training recruits on safety protocols. A cruel irony for a woman who lived to fly. The mockery begins. The flight attendant, a young man with a tired smile, passed by, offering lukewarm coffee. Eliza politely declined. A few rows ahead of her in 19C, a loud, booming laugh cut through the drone of the aircraft. It belonged to a man in a crisp suit, flanked by 2 younger colleagues. Eliza recognized him faintly, a civilian logistics contractor who occasionally worked near the base. He seemed to be relishing telling a story. So I said to the colonel, the man whose name she recalled was Mr. Vance, bellowed, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. You gotta be careful about who you put in charge of these high-tech machines. They start thinking they're hotshots, little girls playing with big toys, and suddenly they're changing the entire mission plan because of a stray kitten. His colleagues roared with laughter. Eliza felt a slow, hot flush creep up her neck. She knew he wasn't talking about her specifically, but the sentiment was a direct echo of the rumors that had circulated after her grounding, that she lacked the steel required for command, that her female empathy clouded her military judgment. That's why I prefer the older guys, Vance continued, oblivious to the quiet woman 2 rows back. Hardened, predictable. You want someone who follows the checklist, not someone who's going to get emotional and try to be a hero. Flying is serious business, not a hobby for the soft-hearted. The words landed on Eliza like small, sharp stones. They cut deep into the wound that was still healing. She squeezed the armrest, telling herself, stay calm. It doesn't matter what they think. You did the right thing. But the sting was still there. That deep, pervasive feeling of being utterly underestimated, not just for her skill, but for her character. The jolt, she took a deep breath, focusing on the rhythmic engine noise, trying to push the venomous words out of her mind. Just another flight in 22B. Then, the rhythm broke. It wasn't a smooth air pocket. It was a violent, teeth-rattling shudder that slammed the plane sideways. Trays tumbled. A woman screamed, sharp and brief. The lights flickered wildly, settling into a sickly, pulsing emergency red. The engine noise didn't drone. It howled. A strangled, metallic screech coming from the port side. The voice from the cockpit was a panicked, broken mess over the intercom. cutting out before a full sentence could be formed. The plane began to descend fast, not a controlled glide, but a terrifying, stomach-lurching plunge, and then above the wails of the passengers and the mechanical terror of the failing aircraft, a new sound cut through. A man, tall, built like granite, wearing dark tactical gear that somehow appeared instantly from the front of the plane, slammed open the cockpit door and shouted, his voice a trained iron roar that echoed throughout the dying cabin. "Who can fly?" Eliza Thorne, the paper pilot, felt her heart stop, then begin to beat hard and fast for the first time in 6 months. The cage was breaking open. The immediate aftermath of the shout was a confusion of raw terror. Passengers shrieked or whimpered. The emergency oxygen masks dangling from the ceiling swayed like ghostly pendulums. The terrifying, stomach-dropping dive continued, pressing everyone into their seats. The man who had shouted stood in the narrow aisle, radiating controlled, lethal energy. He was clearly military, probably special forces, a SEAL, judging by his bearing, the intense focus in his eyes, and the way he held himself against the plane's violent shaking. He looked around the cabin, his gaze sweeping past the weeping, the paralyzed, and the panicked. "I need a pilot! I need someone with jet or turboprop experience, now!" he yelled again, his voice cracking slightly with urgency. The pilot and co-pilot were slumped forward over the controls, visible through the open cockpit door. The cause was unclear, a sudden illness, a depressurization, or something worse. But they were out of the fight. The plane was flying itself into a disaster. The second insult Eliza didn't hesitate this time. The insults of the logistics contractor, Mr. Vance, faded away like static. The pain of the paper pilot nickname vanished, replaced by the instinct she had spent years honing. She was a soldier. She was a pilot. And lives were in danger. She unbuckled her belt, pushing aside the small, frail woman next to her and moved into the aisle. The plane banked sharply, nearly throwing her against the ceiling, but her core muscles, trained through years of flight school and combat maneuvers, kept her steady. "I can fly," Eliza said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the general din of fear. "I'm a rotary wing Army pilot, Sergeant Thorne." The SEAL, Master Chief Rourke, as the logo on his chest patch identified him, turned his full attention on her. He was 6'2", perhaps 220 pounds of solid muscle, and he looked her up and down. Eliza was 5'5", physically strong but lean, with the calm, focused eyes of a trained combat veteran. Rourke's face, which had been tight with emergency concentration, twisted into a look of profound disappointment and dismissal. "A helicopter pilot?" he scoffed, the word dripping with scorn. "This is a regional jet, Sergeant." "We need a fixed-wing expert. Someone who understands flaps and stabilizers at commercial speeds. I need a real pilot, son, not someone dressed for a weekend trip." His words were like a slap. He didn't just dismiss her gender or size. He dismissed her entire career and skill set as irrelevant. The mockery was back, raw and in the face of death. Mr. Vance, the logistics contractor, chimed in, pointing a trembling finger at Eliza. "She's probably one of those administrative types. The ones who file the paperwork. Don't waste your time, Chief." The reckoning Rourke ignored Vance and turned his back on Eliza, already looking toward the rear of the plane. "Anyone else? Military, civilian, anyone with a commercial license?" "Master Chief," Eliza stated, louder now, planting her feet. The plane was screaming around them, the air growing hot and thick. "I was grounded for insubordination, not incompetence. I've flown C-130 gunships on ferry flights. I know the physics of heavy body. Fixed-wing flight, I know how to calculate glide slope with asymmetrical thrust. And I know how to land something that doesn't want to be landed." She stepped closer to him, forcing him to meet her gaze, which was now steel-hard. "The cockpit is depressurized. That's why the pilots are out," she said, her voice dropping to a low, authoritative tone. "That means we have less than 6 minutes before we hit the altitude where an unpowered descent becomes terminal. If you don't take me, you take no one. Your choice, Master Chief, but it stops being a choice in 3 minutes." Rourke hesitated. He looked at the chaos, then back at Eliza. He saw past the unassuming exterior to the sheer, unshakable confidence in her eyes. He saw the fire that had once won her 1,000 accolades before the one mistake that cost her everything. He had no other options. The other passengers were either useless or terrified. "Fine, Sergeant Thorne," Rourke growled, conceding. "Let's see the paper pilot fly." The catastrophe revealed Rourke grabbed her arm and practically dragged her toward the cockpit. The door was off its hinge, hanging precariously. The instruments were a nightmare of red and flashing yellows. "Here's the situation," Rourke said, pointing at the shattered, frozen window. "We lost the number 2 engine to a compressor stall. Shrapnel damaged the hydraulics to the ailerons. The landing gear warning is lit, but the manual release is jammed. We're 30,000 feet up, over the Sangre de Cristo mountain range, and we're heading toward Santa Fe. They've given us a vector to a remote, unstaffed airstrip 40 miles out. It's too short for this bird, but it's the only flat ground for miles. Get in. You have control." Eliza didn't argue or protest. She slid into the pilot's seat, strapping in, the sheer complexity of the controls, a sudden, exhilarating rush after months of staring at a beige desk. The smell of oil, sweat, and ozone was home. She reached for the yoke, her fingers finding the grooves instantly. The plane bucked beneath her, a frantic, injured beast. "Master Chief," Eliza commanded, her voice calm and absolute, instantly taking command. "I need you to secure the cockpit door panel and start working the emergency hydraulic pump handle. We need to try and get those gear down manually. You are my co-pilot. Do you copy, Master Chief?" Rourke, stunned by the instant shift in her demeanor from grounded soldier to absolute commander, replied without thinking. "I copy, pilot." Eliza Thorne's hands, which had been stiff and cold for months from lack of use, were now alive, dancing across the controls. The chaos and the mocking words vanished. There was only the aircraft, the immediate crisis, and the cold, unyielding language of physics and engineering. She had to stabilize the plane first. With one engine out and the resulting asymmetrical thrust, power pushing harder on one side than the other, the plane wanted to spin wildly. She wrestled the yoke, pushing hard on the rudder pedal with her left foot to counter the uncontrolled turn. Her face was set in a mask of intense concentration, but beneath it, the relief of flying again was a fierce, bright flame. The pilot's resolve. "Report on the emergency hydraulic pump, Master Chief," Eliza ordered, her eyes flicking across the instrument panel. Rourke was already grunting, struggling with the small, heavy crank handle near the floor. "It's tight, pilot, like it's rusted solid. I'm getting resistance. Keep going. We need those gear down, or we skip off the runway like a stone," she said. Eliza focused on the jammed controls. The hydraulic failure meant the ailerons, the small control surfaces on the wings that help bank and turn the plane, were barely responding. This meant she couldn't turn smoothly. She would have to rely on a brutal, non-standard combination of rudder and differential thrust, using the remaining engine's power to change direction. This was a maneuver taught only in advanced military flight schools, often deemed too risky for standard transport. "This is why I was grounded," a quiet voice in her mind whispered. "Because I take the risky, non-standard option to save the mission." She pushed the thought away. She wasn't saving a mission now. She was saving people. It was the same reason she was grounded, but now the stakes were absolute. This time, there would be no court-martial, only a headstone if she failed. The grudging. Partnership Rourke looked back at her, sweat pouring down his brow from the effort of cranking the stubborn hydraulic pump. He saw the sheer, unadulterated competence in her actions. She wasn't fighting the plane, she was communicating with it, coaxing it despite the damage. "We have to make the Santa Fe strip, pilot," Rourke gasped out. "I'm receiving intermittent." Static from the ground. They're scrambling choppers, but we're too far out. "No help is coming in time." "We're too high and too fast," Eliza replied, her tone strictly professional. "The strip is too short. If we go straight for it now, we'll overrun the runway and hit the highway." She pointed through the window at the distant, jagged mountains. "See that valley just ahead? I'm going to drop our airspeed and altitude rapidly by using a military high-G spiral descent. It'll be rough. Tell the cabin to brace for extreme G-forces. And tell the passengers we are going to make it." Rourke's eyes widened slightly. A high-G spiral descent in a commercial jet was borderline insane. It risked structural failure on an already damaged plane. "Sergeant, that'll terrify the people back there. It'll look like we're falling out of the sky," he warned. "They're terrified anyway," Eliza snapped, focusing on her calculations. "Fear won't kill them. Impact will. Do your job, Master Chief. I'm doing mine." He left the hydraulic pump and went back to the main cabin, his face grim. He saw Mr. Vance, the contractor, curled up, pale, clutching his seat cushion. Vance watched Rourke with wide, pleading eyes. Rourke looked down at him. "The pilot is dropping altitude fast. Hold on tight. She knows what she's doing." It was the first time Rourke had ever referred to Eliza as the pilot, without a trace of irony or doubt. The spiral Eliza banked the plane sharply, the maneuver forcing the remaining engine to howl. The sudden, violent turn and pitch sent the passengers reeling, screams erupting again. The G-force pushed Eliza deep into her seat. It was painful, blurring her vision for a second, but she grit her teeth and held the course. She was losing altitude, by the thousands of feet, but she was scrubbing off speed and lining up for the distant, tiny airstrip. "Status on the gear!" she shouted over the wind rushing through the broken side window. Rourke, now back in the cockpit and bracing himself against the instrument panel, shook his head. "Hydraulic pressure is building slowly, but the lights are still red. They're stuck, Sergeant. We're going to have to land without them. Belly landing." A belly landing without landing gear on an unpaved, short strip of ground was virtually a death sentence for the aircraft and a serious risk to everyone on board. "No," Eliza said, her voice heavy with determination. "We're not. They're going to come down. I have an idea. Get me the emergency checklist for a cargo drop door." Rourke stared at her. "Cargo door? This plane doesn't have a—" "It has an emergency. Access panel to the main landing bay," Eliza explained, already pointing to a diagram. "It's a long shot, but if we can get one person into the wheel well and manually release the pin—" "Absolutely not! That's suicide!" Rourke yelled. "It's the only chance to save the plane and the people," Eliza countered. "One person. That person will be me, but I need you to fly while I do it. Can you hold the stick steady at 300 feet, Master Chief? Or are we just going to accept the crash?" Rourke stared at her, horrified. "You want to leave the cockpit at 300 feet to manually crank a pin? You'll be sucked out, Sergeant. That's madness." "It's a two-person job, Master Chief," Eliza said, already unbuckling her safety harness. "You are strong enough to keep the plane level. You just need to hold the stick. I am small enough to fit through the access panel. This is not a discussion. I will get the gear down. You just keep us from banking." She looked him straight in the eye. "My priority is to save the people in the back. A belly landing on this runway guarantees severe injuries for half the cabin. I will take the risk to prevent that. Do you trust me, Master Chief?" Rourke knew in that moment he was witnessing the true strength of a soldier. Not the ability to follow orders, but the willingness to sacrifice everything for the lives of others. It was the same kind of reckless courage that had earned her the charge of insubordination 6 months ago. "I trust you, pilot," Rourke said, his voice flat with acceptance. He slid into her seat and wrapped his enormous hands around the yoke. "Give me the controls." The sacrifice Eliza quickly explained the panel release sequence, her words clipped and precise. She strapped a short safety line to a structural column, gave Rourke one last nod, and moved to the small, square access panel in the floor just behind the pilot's seats. As she worked the bolts, the plane was still rapidly descending, the dry, rocky landscape of New Mexico rushing up to meet them. She dropped through the panel into the cramped, dark, terrifying space of the wheel well. The roar of the engine was deafening down here, a physical punch. She was now feet away from the airstream. The plane was currently traveling at over 200 miles per hour. She located the manual release for the pin, a thick metal handle deep inside the machinery. Her small size was an asset now. The air was frigid, the vibration intense. She couldn't use her eyes. She had to use her fingers, tracing the metal, finding the lever. 500 feet! Rourke's voice crackled over the intercom speaker in the well. His tone was tight. "I'm at the pin!" She yelled back, though she couldn't hear her own voice over the screaming wind. She grabbed the lever, but it was corroded and stuck tight. She pulled, then pushed, then pulled again, bracing her feet against a structural rib, using all her strength, fueled by months of frustrated energy. The people in 22B are counting on you. Vance is counting on you. The pilots you replaced are counting on you. With a sickening metallic snap, the pin released. Immediately, the landing gear dropped with a jarring thud and locked into place. 3 green lights flashed on the panel above Rourke's head in the cockpit. "Gear down and locked, pilot!" Rourke shouted, relief and awe momentarily overpowering the crisis in his voice. "I'm coming back up," Eliza shouted, hauling herself back through the panel. Her body scraped and bruised, her lungs burning. The final approach, Eliza slammed the panel shut, staggered back to the cockpit, and strapped herself into the co-pilot seat as Rourke flew. They were at 400 feet, rapidly approaching the dangerously short strip of asphalt. Eliza took control again. "My controls!" The plane felt heavy and unbalanced. The loss of the engine and the damaged ailerons meant a perfect landing was impossible. The tiny airstrip was now directly in front of them. "I have to bleed off the speed," Eliza muttered, her eyes darting between the runway end and the airspeed indicator. "We're coming in too fast. I'm going to put us down hard and fast, and I'll use the barrier at the end to kill the last 50 knots. This was the final, critical sacrifice. She could try to land smoothly, but they would run off the end of the short runway and likely explode on the highway just beyond it. Or she could execute a brutal, controlled crash landing that would save the lives of the passengers, but guarantee the total loss of the aircraft and severe injury to herself from the planned final impact. "Hold on." "Master Chief," she whispered. She slammed the plane onto the tarmac, far earlier than standard procedure, forcing the heavy jet to take the impact. The tires shrieked, the reverse thrusters screamed, and the plane lurched violently. But it wasn't enough. The end of the runway was rushing toward them. She saw the bright red construction barrier at the end. She steered the damaged wing directly into a dirt berm to swing the nose sideways, killing most of the speed, and then let the nose and the remaining wings shear into the barrier. The final impact was a deafening, bone-jarring, metallic tearing. Everything stopped. Silence. The only sound was the drip of fluids and the sudden, shocked silence from the cabin. Eliza slumped against her restraints, her head throbbing, her chest aching, but she was breathing. She had landed the plane. For a moment, there was nothing but the silence, a deep, ringing stillness that felt heavier than the roar had been. Then a slow, building wave of noise began, gasps, sobs, and finally, a ragged cheer from the main cabin. Master Chief Rourke was the first to move. He was shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline. He looked at Eliza, her face bruised and cut, but her eyes bright and focused. "Pilot," he breathed, a genuine, deep respect in his voice. "We made it. Everyone out," Eliza said, pushing past her pain. "Engine fire risk. Get the doors open, use the emergency slides, now!" Rourke was already through the broken cockpit door, barking orders that cut through the passenger's shock. He personally helped pull the mocking logistics contractor, Mr. Vance, from his seat. Vance was sobbing uncontrollably, his pale face streaked with tears. As Eliza staggered out into the harsh New Mexico sunlight, leaning heavily on the fuselage, Vance saw her. He dropped to his knees in the dirt. "Sergeant Thorne," he choked out, bowing his head. I said those things. I called you names. I'm sorry. You saved us. You are the bravest person I have ever met. I judged you." Eliza simply looked at him, her expression exhausted but calm. "Get clear of the plane, Mr. Vance." The paper pilot had no need for apologies now. Her actions had spoken. The twist. The exposure of truth minutes later, as the passengers gathered safely away from the smoking wreckage. 3 helicopters, not standard rescue choppers, but sleek, black military models, descended on the strip. The first person out of the lead helicopter was not an EMT or a standard military rescue captain. It was General Sterling, the man who had grounded Eliza Thorne. His face was stern, but his eyes held a complex mix of relief and pride. He walked past the stunned passengers and went directly to Master Chief Rourke, who snapped to attention. "Report, Chief," Sterling commanded. "Plane down. General, secure. All civilian personnel accounted for and safe. Minor injuries only, no fire. The pilot is Sergeant Thorne." Sterling nodded slowly. He looked at Eliza, who was sitting on the ground, holding her bruised arm, watching the scene with tired intensity. "Master Chief," Sterling said, his voice carrying clearly in the dusty, quiet air. "You are relieved." "Mission successful." Rourke immediately stepped out of his tactical gear, revealing a clean, pressed dress uniform beneath. He wasn't a SEAL. He was Chief Warrant Officer Rourke, a senior inspector for military flight operations, reporting directly to General Sterling. The shocking truth settled over the scene like the settling dust. The flight hadn't been an accident. Rourke looked at Eliza and gave her a slight, respectful bow. "Sergeant Thorne, you weren't grounded for incompetence. You were grounded because the Internal Affairs Division, led by a colonel I won't name, demanded it. Your action of saving those civilians was the right one, but it put the Army at risk of a massive liability lawsuit." He paused, then delivered the final, powerful piece of the puzzle. "General Sterling knew you were the finest pilot he had. He knew you were capable of extreme, non-standard maneuvers. He has been fighting to reinstate you, but he needed proof. Undeniable, life-or-death proof that your insubordination was a measure of absolute skill, not recklessness. The incapacitation of the pilots was a planned training exercise. The damage to the plane and the stuck landing gear were real. Timed failures meant to test a pilot's ability to handle catastrophic damage under duress. This was a live, high-stakes test, Sergeant." Justice and Redemption General Sterling walked over to Eliza, pulling a sealed envelope from his jacket. "Sergeant Thorne," the general said, his voice softer now, entirely professional. "6 months ago, I had to condemn your judgment to save the reputation of this command. Today, your actions have saved 200 souls. You were the only one we could trust to make the dangerous, selfless choice." He handed her the envelope. "This is not a court-martial. This is your full and immediate reinstatement to active flight status. Your charge of insubordination has been formally withdrawn and replaced with a commendation for extraordinary heroism in the face of grave danger." Eliza looked down at the paper, her vision blurring, not from pain but from the sudden, powerful rush of relief and vindication. The paper pilot had flown. General Sterling knelt beside her and added quietly, "I have also included the paperwork for the Silver Star, Sergeant. Welcome back to the sky." Eliza Thorne, the woman once mocked and belittled, looked up at the general, then at the smoking wreck of the jet, a tangible monument to her courage and sacrifice. The plane was destroyed, but the people were safe. Justice wasn't just served. It was delivered at 200 knots on a gravel runway, earning her the highest respect she could ever achieve. She was no longer defined by the paperwork, but by the fire in her heart. She was a pilot,